Hi, I'm Raymond Simonson. I'm the CEO of JW3, London's Jewish Community Centre and the UK's only Jewish arts and culture venue of its kind. Sadly, as you know, we've had to temporarily close our doors at the moment. We've got to think about people's health and safety, and we're listening to government advice. But just because we've stopped doing what we normally do in the way that we do it, it doesn't mean we have to completely stop what we're doing and what we're best at. And that is to increase the quality, variety and volume of Jewish conversation in London and beyond. So we've got some treats for you. We are going to put on a whole load of our digital archive that we've been building up over the last 6 years of some amazing events. We're going to make them absolutely free of charge to you. And whilst you sit down with a cup of tea and put your feet up and watch this amazing thing you're about to see now, our team are going to be planning for a whole bunch of events that we're going to put on digitally over the coming months. For now, this one's on us, it's free. But you know, everything that we do costs money. And at the moment, we don't have the same income streams that we've got. So if you can spare a few pennies, a few shekels, if you can click donate online, that'll be really wonderful. We'd be so grateful for it. If you can do that, that's great. But either way, please sit back and enjoy. We'll see you again soon.
Good evening. Friends, it is nice to see so many of you here this evening. My name is Raymond Simonson. I'm the fortunate one that gets to be the CEO of JW3, and it's nice to see so many familiar faces, and it's really exciting to see lots of new faces in the audience this evening. And this is, as I said, a very auspicious occasion. It is the launch of our new partnership project with Genesis Philanthropy Group. With their generous support and kind friendship, we're excited to launch the Global Jewish Conversation Series. This is in support of our mission to increase the quality, the variety and the volume of Jewish conversation around the community. Now, the principal aims of this series are to deliver a rich, diverse and inspiring series of high-caliber conversations on a range of Jewish themes and subjects that will educate and entertain. Our wish for this Global Jewish Conversation series is to spark discussions around contemporary issues of relevance to the Jewish people by hearing from inspiring Jewish speakers of the highest caliber, Jewish leaders, philanthropists, journalists, entrepreneurs, artists, writers and thinkers from across the Jewish world. The series will have a particular focus on bringing the very best of global Jewish diaspora to the British Jewish community, something that doesn't happen enough. Now, this series has been planned over the past year following the overwhelmingly positive response we received to our pilot event early last year, which saw Natan Sharansky in conversation with international businessman, philanthropist, and Genesis Philanthropy Group co-founder, Michal Friedman. And if anybody else like me was here on that evening, we were treated to a really huge treat that night. So starting from tonight with tonight's event, we will be programming one specially curated event every season at JW3. Each event will be different, but it will include a conversation between the speakers on the JW3 stage before we open up to a wider discussion with an invitation to you, to any audience member, to join in the dialogue. And more importantly, the conversations that we start in this room are a trigger to the conversations we want you to take back to your families, to the Shabbat table, to the Kiddush table, and everywhere else you go where there's food. These encounters between high-profile speakers and audiences like us will create opportunities for internationally acclaimed Jewish figures to influence the key conversations taking place within British Jewry, ensuring that different diaspora voices are heard in our conversations. In the current climate we find ourselves in, we hear of a growing sense of disunity and fragmentation, both within the community and without. And one of JW3's key goals is to bring people together from very different backgrounds to encounter one another and to learn from each other. So thanks to Genesis Philanthropy Group's generous support and valuable partnership, this series is going to enable us to bring British Jewish audiences into direct contact with diverse voices from across the Jewish world. The Genesis Philanthropy Group's CEO, Ilyas Salita, is unfortunately stuck in New York tonight, so he couldn't be with us to address us in person like I know he wanted to. He has, however, sent us this brief message by way of introducing the series. So please turn your eyes to the screen.
Good evening. It is my genuine pleasure to welcome all of you at this first event in the Global Jewish Conversation series, a joint initiative between Genesis Philanthropy Group and JW3. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you here tonight at JW3, but that's okay. There is one more seat for a curious Londoner in the room. We began planning this series more than a year ago, after witnessing the overwhelming response to our pilot event. Those of you who were here at the conversation between Natan Sharansky and a co-founder of Genesis Philanthropy Group, Michael Friedman, remember the thrill of intellectual curiosity that permeated the room. Global Jewish Conversations aims to do just that: inspire discussion, educate and entertain, and challenge conventional thinking. The stage will host the very best the Jewish world has to offer: those who think, those who create, those who give, and those who lead. They will talk about their experiences and their ideas. They will discuss problems and offer solutions, and they will hear and respond to your questions. These conversations will be not just intellectually stimulating, they will be relevant to issues and challenges British Jewry and global Jewry must deal with on a daily basis. We hope that they will offer you new perspectives, new outlook, and new horizons of thought. These are, of course, grand promises, but I believe that tonight's event is an exceptionally good step on the road to fulfilling them. And with that, we're deeply grateful to Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Mr. Tal Keinan, and of course Baroness Altman for sharing their wisdom and their time with us tonight. With special gratitude to Raymond and the JW3 team, I thank you all for joining us. Enjoy.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. It is an honor for me to be moderating this event. I feel very humbled to be here. And I would also particularly like to thank Raymond and JW3 for their concept of this type of event, which I hope you will all find interesting, informative, and inspiring. The Genesis Philanthropy Group as well, who have kindly sponsored it. I think it is wonderful that we have so many opportunities of this nature in our community. And of course, this is Global Jewish Conversations. Now, you wouldn't think that one needed too much encouragement for Jewish conversation, but the idea is to inspire, to educate, and to entertain. And I certainly hope and believe that tonight you will be in for a real treat in terms of the quality of our discussion. And we are delighted, and as I say, I am really honoured to have both our guests here this evening. Rabbi Lord Sachs, who hardly really needs any introduction, the best global ambassador for Judaism that we could wish for in the modern world, the Jewish voice that resonates way beyond Judaism. And as far as I'm concerned, and I am sure I know many others, Rabbi Lord Sachs is the preeminent religious thinker of any religion anywhere in the world, head and shoulders above others. And you will see that tonight. I'm sorry if I've embarrassed you, but...
I'm the one who gives you a sermon when you switch on Radio 4 while you wanted to have breakfast.
You stop having breakfast to listen. And of course, the man of the evening, whose book is readily available, and I hope and believe you will all enjoy reading, Tal Keinan, an American-born entrepreneur, social activist, and author, who made the decision to go to Israel, as you will read in the book, was a lone soldier, a fighter in the pilot in the Israeli Air Force. But he is also co-founder of Clarity Capital, global asset management firm with offices in both Tel Aviv and New York. And he's chairman of Koret Israel Economic Development Funds, which is Israel's largest non-profit lender to small and micro businesses. And Tal has written this critically acclaimed book that we're here to discuss tonight, God is in the Crowd, which is a bold proposal for discovering the relevance of Judaism in the 21st century. And it has received enormous praise across the globe, not least from Rabbi Lord Sachs, who has actually said about it that it is enthralling, searching, profound, an extraordinarily powerful work on Jewish identity in the 21st century. And I certainly would recommend all of you to read it, and I hope that you will enjoy the discussion. We are going to have about 40 minutes or so of bilateral discussions between our two distinguished guests, and then we will have time for questions from the audience. So if I may start, Tal, your book will certainly resonate with so many Jews today, I think, who are asking, how does Judaism fit with modern day realities? And why should people in future keep making the choice that they want to be Jewish? It's about Jewish survival and continuity, which I assume everybody in this room is interested in, concerned about, or has their own views of. And I assume, but correct me if I'm wrong, that your search for Jewish understanding and a sense of responsibility and commitment to Jewish survival are the reasons that drove you to write God is in the Crowd. And I wonder what you would like to see as the main takeaways that people should gain from it.
Right. Well, first, thank you both for having me here and for appearing with me, and thank you for JW3 and Ilya Salita. It's wonderful. Global Jewish Conversations is a fantastic title for what we're doing, because I don't think there is enough of a global Jewish conversation today, and that's really part of the answer, my answer to that question. I wrote this book despite my frankly meager qualifications to have written a book on Judaism, because that is a question that I lived much of my life with the wrong answer to. It occurred to me relatively early in life that Judaism is optional. Certainly in the United States, and I assume we're going to speak a little bit about Great Britain, but certainly in the United States, Judaism is optional. And that hasn't been the case for such a large swath of the Jewish world in 2,000 years. And we're not opting in. We are opting out, the vast majority of us, at a rate that within 2 generations, there will not be a Jewish people in the United States, assuming trends remain linear. So the first question is, should there be Jews? Should we care about that? And I answered that question in the wrong way, what I today consider to be the wrong way, and it ended in maybe the most momentous decision of my life. But I was moved by the picture of the boy in the Warsaw Ghetto, which, if you've read the book, I described the moment where I saw that picture for the first time, the boy with his hands up in surrender to Nazi troops. And was caught looking at the left side of the picture, where you see his family and his neighbors, wondering what they were thinking. How had they allowed themselves to get to this situation where they had no contingency plan? And as far as we know, they were all marched off to their deaths. That was the 1943, the final liquidation of the ghetto. And I began asking whether I'm something more than just an American, because I grew up in a typical American Jewish family, typical in that my 3 older brothers married non-Jewish women who I love, and I love my nieces and nephews. They're wonderful. They're just not Jewish. That is the trend in the United States. We didn't really have Judaism growing up, and for the first time, I was forced to ask, did these people consider themselves Poles? Did they not realize that this is part of the cycle of Jewish history? This is the rule, it's not the exception. And not having an answer to that question, I found myself in Israel. And my Zionism was really born from that. And it took me many years and commitments that I really couldn't take back, flying in the Israeli Air Force, to ask, why exactly am I doing this? Because increasingly it does seem like a choice. And even if it's not, if I'm only Jewish because of anti-Semitism, is that really enough of a reason? And I think that the question I hope people would go home with or come away from the book with is that question: should there be Jews? And I ask it in sincerity, meaning I'm open to a negative answer, but I think we should be asking ourselves that, because we're on a trend right now where that our future, I think, is questionable.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, like you both, I want to say thank you to Raymond and to JW3 for hosting this wonderful occasion, and the Genesis Philanthropy Group for sponsoring these global Jewish conversations. And what a wonderful idea this is. I remember people used to say the art of conversation is dead. And I also always used to reply, no, the art of conversation is alive and well and exists in shul when you're supposed to be davening. Or as Lefkowitz, the atheist who went to shul every day, and when asked why he went to shul every day, he said, well, you know, I go with Goldberg. Goldberg goes to talk to God, and I go to talk to Goldberg. So I love this idea of conversation. It is the Jewish form. Although, to be honest, other people have conversations, Jews have arguments. But at least the idea that we can argue constructively together excites me. And it excited me that a secular figure like Tal could write a book in which the first word on the cover is God. I mean, this was really exciting, because it said to me, here is a person who is open. Here is a person who cares. Here is a person who wants to engage with others, who believe things that maybe Tal you don't, who have different kinds of experiences. And the proposition that God is in the crowd is really important, because I think Judaism is unique in this. You know, you have countries like Britain that have a lot of different religions. And you have religions that are spread across many countries. But Judaism is both a religion and a nation. And it is the only one that combines the two. And the end result is, if Judaism were only a religion, there would only be space within it for believers. So the concept of a secular Christian is unintelligible. But the concept of a secular Jew is thoroughly intelligible, because we're a nation, not just a religion. And that means that we are bound together the way a family is bound together in all its diversity and all its variety. So Jews, who are maybe one of the very smallest nations on earth, 1/5 of 1% of the world population, and not just now. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses said in chapter 7, verse 7 of Sefer Devarim, of the book of Deuteronomy, Lo merubachem, not because you were many did God choose you and love you, ki atem hama'at mikol ha'amim, you are the tiniest of all peoples. So this tiny little people makes an enormous amount of noise. Why? Because we are so diverse. Because we're held together as a nation, or to put it more simply, we are held together as a family. And that is why we can converse and why we can argue. Because if you have an argument with a friend, tomorrow he may not be your friend. But if you have an argument with a member of your family, tomorrow they are still a member of your family. So you can, because of that strength of bond between us, we can argue, we can disagree, we can differ. And I think how we cope with diversity is important not only to us, it's important to the world. The world looks at Jews, damn it all, sorry, excuse my language. The world looks at Jews. We've been around, we inspired a little thing called Christianity 2,000 years ago, now 2.4 billion people. 16 centuries ago we inspired, 14 centuries ago we inspired something called Islam, 1.6 billion people throughout the world. In the 17th and 18th centuries, people like John Milton, John Locke, and in the States, Thomas Jefferson, read the Hebrew Bible, and out of it developed the very concepts that created the free societies, the liberal democracies of the West. We have had a decisive influence on history on at least 3 separate occasions. The world is interested in Jews. Sometimes they like us, sometimes, what can you say? I'm facing it. I have a problem with 1 or 2 politicians right now in the United Kingdom. And sometimes we have American politicians who like us, who we feel it's like, sometimes you're embarrassed by your enemies and sometimes by your friends. But one way or another, people are interested with us. And I think they want to know, what does this global age have to learn from the world's first global people? We've been a global people for 2,000 years. 2,000 years ago, there were Jews in Israel, there were Jews in Babylon, there were Jews in Alexandria, there were Jews in Rome. We've been a global people for 2,000 years. What lessons do we have to share with humanity? And one of them is, how do we cope with difference?
Given that particular train of thought, maybe I could ask you, Tal, whether you are confident that your prediction of a linear trend, which has ultimately produced your diagnosis that there won't be any Jews left, might be open to the challenge that we've always been through difficult times, and there have always been times when it seemed like it was the end of the Jews.
Right.
But somehow it hasn't happened, and it's sort of on the lines that Rabbi Lord Sachs has just described.
Sure. So I don't want to come off as too much of I'm not trying to be a prophet. I don't know what's going to happen. And what I can say is the trend will definitely not be linear, for sure. I read on the way over here that 5% of pregnancies end on the predicted due date, 5%. One day before and one day after is 4-point-something%, right? So 5%, it's 95% of births do not happen on the due date, but it's a good baseline. And I think it's good. I think this is true in investing, and I think it's true in life. It's good to have the base case, kind of upside case, a downside case, but it's good to identify a base case. And linearity is a good base case. This could be cyclical, I agree, and certainly history would suggest we've had many ups and many downs. We tend to, the downs tend to be followed by ups. It could be worse, though. It could be worse if you want there to be Jews in the world. It could be exponential. If you just look at the math, the probability of a Jewish male of marrying age meeting a Jewish female of marrying age in Denver, Colorado in 2019 is significantly lower than it was in 2009. That's not quite the case in New York today, but the number of cities which would argue for potentially for exponentiality. So I don't know what the end game is. What I try to suggest in the book is it doesn't matter so much. Here we have a threat and we have an opportunity before us, and I think luckily the prescription for addressing each is the same. And to me, I hope the book ends on an optimistic note. There is what to do. We have resources, and we could do something quite beautiful, I think, with our family.
Yes.
There was an article, I must have read it 40 years ago, in the old, do you remember the old Jewish encyclopedia? You remember the very, very old one? And there's an article there under the heading of Jewish superstition. And it tells the story of certain Eastern European communities where it was considered unlucky to be the first person buried in a new cemetery. When I read this, I thought to myself, to be the second person buried is also Nishka Matzia. Anyway, they had this terrible superstition. Nobody wanted, this community had bought a new plot for a cemetery, and nobody wanted to be the first person to die. So they got together as a community. It's all there if you actually look it up. Old Jewish superstition in the old Jewish encyclopedia. They actually hired a very, very elderly Jew to be the first person to die. And what happened? And again, this is taken from the encyclopedia. Suddenly, dying gave him a new interest in life. You know, whenever he passed, everyone would say, there goes Yossela, the town dyer. You know. And he lived another 10 years, so everyone else had to simply wait. So it turns out that dying gives Jews a new interest in life. Simon Ravidovitz, the great Jewish historian, once wrote an article about Jewish history, which was entitled "The Ever-Dying People." We're always just about to die. And when that happens, wonderful people, totally unexpected, like Tal, come along and say, we can't let the Jewish people die. And they give us new reasons to live. And that's exactly what your book does and why it's so beautiful.
Do you see the same existential threats as Tal is describing in the book? And do you see the sense of urgency, or feel the sense of urgency to modernize and reform how our religion works?
I see it rather more darkly, actually, than Tal. And I'm going to ask you, because I only once ever saw a musical. Our daughter, Dina, said, Dad, you've got to see this. Has anyone seen the musical Hamilton? You've seen this? So you will know the story. Alexander Hamilton, first Treasury Secretary, author of 51 of the 85 Federalist Papers, born in some obscure little Caribbean island to an unmarried mother and an absconding father, and somehow, you know, is so gifted that the townspeople pay for him to go to King's College. It was called then Columbia University, as it's called now, etc., etc. And all the way through this, he sings a song, I am not throwing away my shot. He's got this wonderful moment, and he's not going to throw it away. He sings this 11 times in the course of the musical. But what happens? He throws it away. Number one, by having an adulterous relationship, which almost kills his marriage, and certainly kills any chance he might have of being president of the United States. As Thomas Jefferson sings in the musical, that's one less thing to worry about. And then, like a fool, knowing that he lost his son, Philippe, in a duel, he accepts a duel with Jefferson's vice president, Aaron Burr, and is killed in that duel. He throws away his shot. I want you to think, we know everything Tal says, and it's all true, that Israel is deeply divided, that the world's largest diaspora community, the United States, is out marrying at the rate of 7 in 10 outside the Orthodox community. Bad things are happening. But think about this. We've been around a long time, 4,000 years. Jews have lived in virtually every country under the sun. And yet never before in the whole of Jewish history have we had simultaneously independence and sovereignty in Israel and freedom and equality in the diaspora. Everything my Bubba and Zayda and their Bubbas and Zaydas ever prayed for, we have. And what are we doing? We're throwing away our shot. This is crazy. It's absolutely mad. Why did Jews want the land of Israel? Just as a refuge, just as a place where you don't have to watch anti-Semites on the television. I mean, they wanted the state of Israel because they wanted the chance to do what every other nation takes for granted and we could never do, which is build a society according to our own deepest values. Tzedek, Mishpat, Chesed, Rachamim, righteousness, justice, loving kindness and compassion. That's what Israel should be. It should be the living embodiment of what Judaism is supposed to be in the public domain. You should see that in its schools. You should see that in its welfare facilities. You should see it And you do, of course, you really do, but the world never sees that Israel. And secondly, out there in the diaspora, for heaven's sake, why did we not take a Jewish message to the world? Even if you have to do it when everyone's trying to eat a decent breakfast, at least take a Jewish message.
You are doing that.
Well, but I mean, there are not enough people doing it.
I agree.
And it's really, really sad. So I'm not worried the way Tal is that we're going to disappear, because Tal knows this is a self-refuting prophecy. All you've got to do is tell Jews we're about to disappear and suddenly we appear. I'm worried that we're throwing away our shot, that Hashem wants us to do something with all of this.
Is that perhaps part of the issue with being a Jew in Israel, where to some extent, Tal and I talked about this, the education system in Israel has chosen not to what it would call indoctrinate young children and explain the history of Judaism and the importance of Judaism. American Jews, British Jews, if you have children at Jewish schools, they know about that immediately, and they, even if they choose not to keep it, they've got that foundation. But in Israel, one hears people saying, I'm an Israeli, I'm not a Jew. And I wonder if that is an element in where you see the threats and how you would react to that.
Yeah, so in smaller forums, I often start with that question that we started with the first section of the book, should there be Jews? Only once have I had a negative answer in the United States. In Israel, it happens quite regularly. I wouldn't say it's a commonly held view, but in an audience this size, there'll be 3 or 4 people who will say, yeah, it'd be much better if we could organize for a benign extinction, right? No violence, but if we could fade, for example, the notion of marrying ourselves into extinction in the United States is a very appealing one to many secular Israelis. And I think, secularism in Israel largely defines itself in real enmity with religiosity, right? We've created this is a political fight, and it has been. I think it's been exacerbated in the last 30 years or so, but it's really been from the beginning. So the notion of an Israeli identity, and I understand it and sympathize with it. It's a heavy weight to be an Israeli. It's heavy. Yeah. You have to pursue. I think we all kind of conceive of ourselves both as individuals and as cells in a larger organism, and our lives are arranged, in kind of a tension between the two. In Israel, it's almost impossible to get away from the second. You are a cell in a larger organism. You have obligations to that organism. They're real. They're heavy. They're not taxes. They're putting yourself at physical risk, putting your children at physical risk. I understand and sympathize with the craving for normalcy that many secular Israelis have. The bad news is I just don't think normalcy is on the menu for Israel, and it probably isn't for the Jews. We're not going to be regular. And my answer is, okay, so let's embrace what's special here. Let's celebrate it. And yes, it comes with a cost for sure, but it's something worth preserving. That means we look at Israel as a means and not as an end. The Jewish people has to be the end. Israel would be the means. That's not a message that resonates so well with many Israeli audiences. I understand it, but I think it is a question that we have to raise in Israel.
Well, following on from many of the themes in your book, Rabbi Lord Sachs, one of the particular themes is this conflict between universalism and particularism, which are themes that you have featured so prominently in your own writings. Of course, the distinction between universalism and particularism isn't just a straight line continuum. That it's not black and white. They can fade into each other. But how would you define Judaism in this context? You've suggested Judaism as a faith. But
the Jewish approach to this, I think, is really unusual. It's hard for people to understand. and it is incredibly important. And it can be stated very simply. We believe that the God of Israel is the God of all humanity. But we do not believe that the religion of Israel is the religion of all humanity. And that is the tension between the universal and the particular in Judaism. And it is, to my mind, the most blessed idea I know of, full stop. Why? Because it means that God has made space for the people not like us. Yes, we have the religion of Israel, but God is still there shining his light on the people who stand outside the religion of Israel, because all of them are made in his image. Let me ask you a question. Who says Baruch Hashem in the Torah? Thanks God, right? Who says it? Number 1, Noah. Number 2, Abraham's servant Eliezer when he finds a wife for Isaac. And number 3, Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. 3 non-Jews. They are the ones who say Baruch Hashem. We do not have the belief that is definitive of Christianity, extra ecclesiam non est salus. Outside the church, no one is saved. We say just the opposite. The righteous of all nations have a share in the world to come. The most perfect individuals in the whole of Tanakh are Noah, Ish Tzaddik, and Job, neither of whom is Jewish. The parasha in which we read the Ten Commandments and the revelation at Sinai is called Yitro, the Midianite priest. We are the only religion I know, certainly the only monotheism I know, that has respect for the people not like us. And I cannot believe that any message is more important in the 21st century. To have respect for the people not like you. That is the exact opposite of all the politics you see here in Britain, in America, and almost everywhere else in the world. The whole of populism is about I'm right, and the others, I'm right, you're wrong, go to hell. That's basically a summary of political attitudes today. So when Jews come along and say, yes, there are universal elements which are that every human being is in the image of God, and that after the flood God made with Noah a covenant of human solidarity. That's the global element. But yes, even we, this tiny little people, do feel ourselves especially close to God, loved by God. Judaism does justice to the universality of justice and the particularity of love. Now, I think those are terribly important. And what has happened in today's Jewish world is that those two elements have split apart. So you find amongst lots of American Jews, only the universal counts, right? Tikkun olam, tikkun the olam, and we'll all be fine. We're like everyone else, only more so. And so they're great on all the social action stuff, but their Jewish particularism is small and diminishing. So they're going to disappear through assimilation. And then you have the particularists, for whom Judaism is absolutely everything, and nothing outside those walls counts for anything at all, and they are strong, but their impact on the world is zero. And so we are seeing Jews split into the universalists and the particularists, whereas Judaism is a matter of keeping those two things together. And when you keep them together, they become very powerful, very creative.
How do you balance the competing forces with Judaism as a faith and Israel as a state?
Yeah.
How do you see that playing out? Do you think that
Israel
is a threat
as a
or an
state
opportunity?
is a political entity, right? And I'm not terrible, I leave political entities to the politicians. I really do. They're better at it than rabbis are. Never let a rabbi have anything to do with politics. That's my principle. So Israel as a state is a political entity that has concerns with security and defense and the economy and everything else. Israel as a society, that's something different. That's where the Jewish identity comes in. That's why we're teaching Israel is Tanakh. The way David Ben-Gurion would want them to know Tanakh. It's their national literature. You don't have to believe in God to find Tanakh a powerful library of works and so on. And I think there are secular Israelis now who have created Batei Midrash, learning programs. Rabbi Benny Lau has created something called 929. Do you know about 929? The chapter of Tanakh a day. And all kinds of Israelis join in and add their commentaries to it. So Israel, the state, is one thing. Israel, the society, is something else entirely.
Tal, your book talks about the wisdom of the crowd, and you believe it's vital to harness perhaps the power of technology to better Judaism and to improve our survival chances. But how do you think we could reach any kind of consensus when, as Rabbi Lord Sachs so often says, the canonical texts of Judaism are anthologies of arguments?
Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure consensus should be the objective. It's reconciliation, and right. I think there's a distinction to be drawn here. I call this era the post-diaspora era in the book, in that, and not to be disparaging of English Jewry, so forgive me, but 90% of the world's Jews are concentrated in two jurisdictions, in Israel and the United States. And I see the trend heading toward the 100, not toward the 80. That's the first time in 2,000 years we've had this sort of concentration. So using the term diaspora as a model to describe the physical architecture of world Jewry it's no longer useful, I think. Diaspora had certain features that lent themselves to the wisdom of crowds. Our diffusion, the fact that we didn't have a pope, there was nobody officiating over the evolution of world Jewry, and Judaism evolved dramatically over 2,000 years in different places, in different ways, without real coordination between them. And it was through the mechanism, or at least I posit, of expulsions and migrations that we were forced to reconcile our diverging interpretations of what this is, what is Judaism, without an authority to adjudicate globally. We were talking about conversion the other day. If a conversion took place in a town in Germany in the 19th century, no rabbi in Morocco was consulted about the validity of that conversion. He didn't get to weigh in. He probably had never heard of the rabbi who performed the conversion, might have never heard of the town in Germany, might never have heard of Germany. That was just not, we were living in really isolated worlds. By the way, the descendants of that convert are Jews. Yeah. Within 2 or 3 generations, we've stopped counting who's who. So we were just talking earlier, how many people in the room are direct descendants of Abraham and Sarah? I think probably not a plurality of this room. That would be my guess. So we've accepted new members along the way, new ideas, but in a process of really crowd adjudication or crowd wisdom, no leader. When I look at Israel today, for the first time in 2,000 years, we've reestablished Jewish sovereignty. And yes, we are a state that gives the arms of government teeth, right? We can. It's not just opinions now. We're not sitting in a room in Amsterdam, you from Cordoba, me from Sevilla, and the rabbi from Toledo, and arguing about whether we should be eating legumes on Passover or not. Nobody can really definitively say this is the answer. Now we do have an authority that speaks for world Jewry, and I don't think we gave much thought to what that actually means today. And so when we talk about Israel, and this is where the technology component, I think, comes in, to the rabbi's point, nation and society, I use different terms, but I think we're talking about the same thing. Israel's really filling 2 different missions. One is very standard. I mean, it's like Switzerland. We're a country, right? We need fiscal policy. We need healthcare policy. We need the plumbing of any country, and we have a government that does that, for better or for worse. We're also the self-proclaimed nation state of the Jewish people, and that does not mean anything specific in Israel. Other than maybe the law of return, which basically makes us a physical refuge for Jews, we haven't really decided what that means. And to me, if we split the government, and again, this part of the prescription flies better in the diaspora than it does in Israel, but split the government into two. One, just run a state, defense policy, healthcare policy, that really should be run by the Parliament of Israel. But the second piece is running the nation state of the Jewish people, which really only has three areas of jurisdiction that are important. One is custody over the holy sites of Judaism. If we are the self-proclaimed custodian of those holy sites, why did we not set up in Argentina? Why did we set up in Israel? It's because of those sites. That is on behalf of all Jews, not just Israeli Jews. The nation's obligations to Jews outside of Israel. Okay, so today we do, the state of Israel does take responsibility for the fate of Jews outside of Israel, but Jews outside of Israel have no say in exactly how that happens. And the third, and perhaps the most contentious, my guess is that both of you probably disagree with me on this, but I think it's the most important, is the definition of who is a Jew, which in this country, if somebody wants to convert to Judaism, I'm pretty sure I can find a rabbi who will agree to convert that person no matter what their circumstances. I'm pretty sure I can find a rabbi who will reject that conversion, and no matter what the circumstances. But you don't care. You're going to affiliate with the community that embraced you, and you're going to ignore the community that rejects you. In Israel, you have to care. You have to care. It really matters whether the state considers you a Jew or not. Your rights are different. And the way we resolve that today is two men make a decision without much accountability. There are rabbis who make the cut today, might not make the cut tomorrow. We don't know who is qualified to convert or declare somebody Jewish. That's something that we have to fix, and I think we can. That's the sort of thing we can do through the crowd, not by generating a consensus, but by generating a reconciliation. Sorry for the long answer.
Rabbi Lord Sachs, do you see this in the same way, that there is a problem with the auspices, if you like, of the rabbinic judgments within Israel as they apply both within Israel and outside?
Maimonides in his law code talks about times when Jewish identity had fuzzy boundaries. During the reign of David and Solomon and other times, when a lot of people converted, not under official auspices. And he said that what happened was, we wait and see. Do they stay within the fold or don't they? Just wait and see. So I think we are in an age when Jewish identity has those fuzzy boundaries. I think we have to live with it. It's a very, very fraught and political issue about which I can't say a great deal. But I do think the fact that there are those fuzzy boundaries in Israel itself, a group of rabbis, as you will know, including my own teacher, Rabbi Rabinovich, set up a big din to broaden the portals, the entrance to Judaism, because they felt that there is a danger in Israel that doesn't exist in the diaspora. The danger in Israel is if you have a lot of Russians who have made Aliyah, who are not Jewish and who are not converted, then you are importing to Israel the whole problem of intermarriage, which until then didn't really exist in Israel. So they see the restrictive approach to conversion as carrying strictly religious costs for the future of Israeli Jewry. And since my own teacher is one of those who has lent his authority to this court, I listen to it very carefully, just as I listen as an ex-chief rabbi to the concerns of the chief rabbis of Israel, trying to bring some order to what otherwise would be chaos. So I think it is just one of those moments, both in Israel and in the diaspora, when there aren't sharp boundaries. And the truth is, we wait and see. But I've always felt that converts bring something very special to Judaism. And sometimes they see things in it that born Jews don't see. And I feel this both from my own experience. The first time I went to yeshiva, immediately after university, I went to Kfar Chabad. That is a pretty heavy Russian Chabad Lubavitch yeshiva. My Rosh Yeshiva, who was the most Chabadnik you would ever meet, was a convert to Judaism from Australia. I couldn't believe it. But, my goodness me, I couldn't be his disciple and not say, wow, he brought something spiritual to this intensely spiritual place. And that was something beautiful. And go from there to 6 or 9 months ago when I was doing my programs on morality for the BBC. And I'm sitting in the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University talking to the world's greatest sociologist, Robert Putnam, the Mr. Bowling Alone man. And he's telling me, well, I was born a Lutheran. But Lutheranism is all about the I, about the individual. And Judaism is all about the we, about community. That's why I decided to convert to Judaism. And it's there, I'm sure, on the BBC podcast. It's not, you can actually listen to this. So from my Rosh Yeshiva of 50 years ago to my hero among sociologists at Harvard, I've always been uplifted and inspired by the incredible spiritual gifts that converts bring to Judaism, and I embrace them with love and with respect.
Well, that's one of the idiosyncrasies among world religions about Judaism, among the major world religions. We're not a proselytizing religion, but we do welcome people who choose to want to join us.
Yeah, of course, we assume they must be mad to want to in the first place. But once they pass the sanity test, yes.
I think if I might ask both of you, Tal identifies the different sections of Israeli society, and I think you brilliantly explain the tensions that exist between all of the various groups. You've got the secularists. I think we discussed this, about 2 million within Israeli society, maybe?
That's a guess, yeah. Yeah.
And then you've got the territorialists, so the ones who want desperately to expand into Judea and Samaria and the sort of God-given lands, but that's a very small number, maybe a couple of 100,000.
Yes.
And then what you call the theocrats. I mean, these are the really religious groups who might be seen as the religious leaders in Israel, which is about 1 million people.
I'd say, yeah.
Do you see the theocrats as being crucial to the future of the State of Israel? And how do you see their role in defining Israel and world Judaism?
Yes, I do. And to be clear, a large chunk of the secularist population is religiously observant. The distinction is, how do we want to be governed? Again, most of the people that I've worked with over the years, maybe half the people I've worked with, are religiously observant. They would fall under, in the United States, they'd be called modern Orthodox, but are committed to democracy. If we vote as a nation that we're leaving Judea and Samaria, they're packing up and leaving. Some of them live there, but they will leave. That makes them seculars by my description. They don't want a halachically ruled state either. They are strict observers of halakha themselves. They don't want to tell me, though, how to observe. That population, and maybe it's about 1 million, it's difficult to really say, and I think that the boundaries are a little fuzzy between the various groups. It's the dignity of diversity. At the end of the day, we need each other. We need each other. And by the way, in the most prosaic form, they're the anchor that allows people like me to be adventurous, understanding that there is a home to come back to. We shouldn't be dictating to each other exactly how to live. I think that's a problem. So, if we were able to reconcile that, they would no longer be theocrats, I suppose. But they would be the same people, and I embrace them. By the way, that's not a point that comes out strongly enough in the book, but it should.
Yeah, I think you were quite dismissive of them in some ways.
Yes.
Your description just now is much kinder.
Thank you for the opportunity to fix that.
What about you, Rabbi Lord Sachs? How vital is the theocratic element to Israel? For me, it would seem impossible to imagine Israel without it, but
well, I think two extraordinary things happened in the course of the 20th century and happening now that are really, really extraordinary and almost unprecedented. Number one, the rebirth of the State of Israel, which was the result of all sorts of people, but I think the Chilonim have a particular share in that vision and making it real. Secular Jews like Theodor Herzl, who realized that you have to secularize in order to regain the power of political action. You don't just daven and wait for Hashem to give you a state, you get on and do it. The rebirth of the state. But there has been a second miracle, the rebirth of the Jewish people. And that has come from the theocrats, from the Eidah Haredit. Yeah. Because wherever you go in the world, certainly in Israel, but everywhere else, these are the fastest growing, the only really growing group in the Jewish population. And they're doing things that I don't know there is any great precedent for. I mean, enormous families and a great sacrifice. These were the people, these were the communities that lost 90 to 95% of their members during the Holocaust. And somehow this Udmutzal Ma'esh, this brand plucked from the burning, has repopulated itself and translated itself from Mir and Ponovich to rebuilt Mir and Ponovich in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel. So they performed a miracle not less significant than the rebirth of the state. But as I was saying to Tal, the only thing they haven't noticed yet is nobody among that ultra-Orthodox world has sat down and said, hey guys, we won. We've done it. We've repopulated ourselves. We don't need to live behind ghetto walls anymore. Let's go out and share our Judaism with others, openly, non-judgmentally. One person in that ultra-Orthodox world did that. His name was the Lubavitcher Rebbe. One single person said, instead of turning inward, let's turn outward. And that one person changed the whole Jewish world. There's not a Jewish community anywhere in the world today that has not somehow or other been influenced by that kind of Chabad outreach. Can you imagine what would happen if other figures today in the Eidah Haredit did this? It would be extraordinary because, as Tal has said, the word secular needs to be understood in terms of Israelis, because most Israelis really are traditional and open to it. What they don't like is being judged, and they don't like kfiyat datit, religious coercion. They don't like it being forced upon them by statute and law. So I think the Eidah Haredit has done great things. But it's time now to move on and realize that it has won its particular battle. It has developed strengths, and it doesn't have to be fearful of the outside world anymore.
Thank you.